Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to our 60-minute briefing today with China's Ambassador to the European Union, His Excellency Zhang Ming. Ambassador, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Shada.
I'm Shada Islam, Senior Adviser at European Policy Center. Now, everyone is familiar with the rules of engagement, but let me just repeat them a little bit. So I'll engage in a conversation with the ambassador for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll take questions from the floor. Please ask your questions in the Q&A box on your screen. And since we have a lot to discuss and many questions are expected, please keep them short so I can read them quickly and put them to the ambassador. So let's begin this policy 60-minute briefing. Ambassador, we last had a conversation with you in March this year, and EU-China relations then were already quite strained. US-China geopolitical rivalries were running high. The EU had been criticized for reaching a deal on CAI, the Comprehensive Agreement on Investments, and the EU was also under pressure to align with the US view on China as a strategic adversary. Since then, the EU-China relationship has become even more complex and complicated and more difficult. There have been tit-for-tat sanctions over Xinjiang. The fate of CAI remains uncertain. And of course, Taiwan has now emerged as an even more contentious issue than at any time in the past. So a great deal is also happening, Ambassador, outside the EU-China relationship and also has an impact on this partnership, this relationship. So Europeans have been following the 6th plenum, which has amplified President Xi Jinping's role even further. There has been a long-awaited bilateral meeting online between President Joe Biden and President Xi Jinping. And the first readouts from that meeting appear to be quite constructive and positive. So there's a lot to discuss and many, many questions to put to you. So let's start talking about these questions. So the first thing I want to ask you really is about the overall relationship between the European Union and China. There is today a certain suspicion, lack of trust, lack of confidence, and a certain degree of negativity that is prevailing and hanging over this relationship. In fact, the reciprocal sanctions over Xinjiang has made the situation even worse. So my first question to you would be really, because the EU has said China is a rival, a competitor, but also a partner. But increasingly here in Brussels, China is seen as a rival and a strategic rival and competitor as well. So can we expect a change in this tone? And I think a lot of it will depend on also the sanctions, the tit-for-tat sanctions. So is China ready to roll back these sanctions that you have imposed on parliamentarians, European parliamentarians, and some think tanks?
Hello, Shada. Good morning. It's a pleasure to talk to you again. Indeed, a lot of things happened these days. Last week, the 19th, the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China convened its 6th plenary session. We have a saying in China that through the mirror of history, one can gain foresight into the future. In light of this, the plenary takes stock of the party's achievements and experience in the past century. And going forward, we will have great confidence to deepen reform and opening up, achieve higher quality development, develop our whole process people's democracy, and promote harmony between humanity and nature. A China that fully embraces modernization will bring great opportunities for the whole world, with the EU included. In fact, a couple of hours ago, my president, Mr. Xi Jinping, had his first one-on-one video meeting with President Biden. The meeting is significant for the bilateral relations and international relations at large. The two leaders talked for hours, long time, and had an in-depth and concrete discussion that covers a wide range of topics. They both expressed the positive will to better develop bilateral cooperation and manage differences. Well, back to the China-EU relations. Our last conversation took place in last March when the EU was mulling sanctions against China. I remember I told you at that time that sanction was an act of confrontation and that we hoped the European side could think twice. I also said that if someone insisted on confrontation, we would not back down. Unfortunately, my advice was not taken. The EU went ahead and imposed the sanctions against China, which led to current difficulties in our communications. To resolve such difficulties, I think adhering to the right perception is the most important step. The way you think decides the way you act. The right way of thinking needs to be built on the right perception. China expressed its clear opposition from the very beginning since the EU came up with the multifaceted approach towards China in also March 2019. We believe that labeling China as a rival was not only a misjudgment of our relations, but would also create difficulties and uncertainties to our cooperation. Today, it's clear that this approach is not delivering. We always believe competition to be benign in nature. Between China and the EU, there is no clash of fundamental interests and geopolitical conflicts. China has no intention to enter into rivalry with the EU or anyone else. What we prefer is to work together with the EU as partners for win-win results. We hope the EU can view our relations in an objective and a rational light instead of focusing on competition and rivalry. In fact, the two sides have established the mature practice of resolving and managing differences through communication. We should follow this path instead of treating each other as rivals or even resorting to sanctions. Well, as two major independent forces, China and the EU should important responsibilities, not only for our people, but also for the world peace, stability, and prosperity. Today's world is faced with mounting challenges, and there is a greater need for China and the EU to join hands. China-EU cooperation is not optional, it's essential. Well, I'm glad to see the recent active momentum in our communications. Not long ago, my president, Mr. Xi, had a phone call with President Michel. The two leaders reached the consensus on promoting bilateral relations. Currently, the two sides are busily preparing for this year's China-EU summit and are exploring new ways to promote our cooperation in numerous areas, including digital and green development. Well, I hope China-EU relations can maintain such a positive momentum. For this sake, we need to think bigger, try to understand each other better, and deal with our differences in a rational and constructive way. Thank you, Shada.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So really no promise that sanctions will change for the moment at least, but there is hope for a summit, EU-China summit. By the end of this year, do you think we could manage that?
Now we are preparing for it. I hope by the end of the year, inshallah.
Right. So the thing is, Ambassador, without removing the sanctions, the relationship to be brought on track, you will not get agreement or ratification of the comprehensive agreement on investments. So I'm just wondering, has China actually given up hope of ever getting CAI ratified? And do you care that it is or isn't ratified? Because it was sold as quite an important breakthrough in the trade and investment relationship.
Well, the commercial ties between China and the EU is very powerful. Despite the pandemic and many other uncertainties, China's trade volume with the EU and the US also increased significantly. This fully proves that the interests of all countries are highly interdependent and closely intertwined. But it's not everyone that understands this truth. A few years ago, we remember unilateralism and protectionism swept the whole world as the Trump administration backed out of international treaties and organizations. As a result, the business ties were strained. The rules-based multilateral trade system was crippled, and the global supply and value chains were distorted. The operation of global industrial and supply chains has been shaped by economic rules rather than man's will. However, instead of learning from one's mistakes, some continue to advocate for decoupling. Decoupling is not a viable option, and the manipulation will only make things worse. China-EU relations should be mature enough to manage their differences in a proper manner. Switching between decoupling and re-engagement should not be our script. It took China and the EU 7 years and 35 rounds of negotiations to agree on the CAI. It's a high-level, balanced, and a comprehensive agreement that carries great expectations of our business communities. I regret to see that because of obstacles caused by the European side, its ratification has hit the rocks. I learned that both our economic communities have been calling for breaking the deadlock and ratifying the agreement as soon as possible. They are not alone in making such appeals. To break the impasse, what's most important, I think, is to return to the nature of the agreement, which concerns trade and economic cooperation. Last week, I noticed President Michel and Madame Nguyen both made some interesting remarks on the agreement. They stated that the CAI could create better conditions for bilateral cooperation. But one could not count on it to solve all problems between two sides. I myself identify with such remarks and regret to see the agreement being severely politicized, because such is a deviation from its original purpose and spirit. I noticed that recently some European business representatives claimed that economic relations should not become the playing thing for political interests. The European side need to listen to these voices. Meanwhile, time and tide wait for no man. The RCEP, to which China is also a member, was concluded almost at the same time as the CAI. But it is already set to take effect on January 1st next year, in 1.5 months. 2 weeks ago, President Xi announced that China would further open up in more sectors, including telecommunications and medical care. China will not slow down its steps of opening up because of temporary difficulties facing the CAI. We don't want to take another 7 years to ratify the agreement. We need to have more European enterprises participate in and benefit from our development. China's position toward the agreement remains unchanged. In fact, relevant departments in China have been busily engaged in the technological preparations for its ratification. The ball, to speak frankly, is in Brussels' court. We hope the EU can return to the original spirit and nature of the agreement and do not let political manipulation get in its way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think the EU would argue that the ball is in China's court, so we are engaged in a game of ping pong, it appears. But let's move on, because I have a lot of questions for you, and I'm sure the audience, the participants also have it. So let's move on to another contentious issue, Taiwan. It's now firmly on the international agenda, the EU agenda. As you know, there's been a European Parliament report, and a delegation from the European Parliament has been to Taiwan as well. The concern is that China seems to be taking a harsher line than in the past. And of course, the US and EU response has been equally robust. So there seems to be a widespread consensus, Ambassador, across the world, I would say, that sooner or later confrontation over Taiwan is inevitable. So my question to you is very simple. Is it inevitable? Is China ready to invade Taiwan?
Well, the Taiwan question is China's internal affairs. It's a highly sensitive issue. But some people in Europe seem to underestimate Chinese people's aspiration for the complete reunification of our country. Let me stress that China's position on the Taiwan question is firm and clear. Such position remains unchanged and will never be changed. There is only one China in the world, and Taiwan is an inalienable part of China. The government of the PR China is the sole government representing China. The One China principle is a UN-recognized norm of international relations and the common consensus of the international community. It is also the political foundation for China's bilateral relations with other countries, including the EU and its member states. Without this foundation, everything above will be shaky. Sir Christopher Somers, then Vice President of the European Community, visited China in 1975. It was during this visit that China and the EEC agreed to establish official relations. On the Taiwan question, Sir Somers stated that all the member states of the community recognized the government of China and had taken positions with regard to the Taiwan question acceptable to the People's Republic. He also confirmed that, and I quote, that the community does not entertain any official relations with Taiwan or have any agreements with it. Such are binding legal obligations of the EU and its member states, and it should be honored with sincerity. We regret to see that recently some people seem to find the Taiwan question an easy and handy card to play. and intend to use it to undermine our interests. Such behavior cannot change the fact that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China. If anything changes, that is the Chinese people's resolve to realize the complete reunification of our country grows even stronger. Last week, I read an article written by a European scholar. He advised the EU not to follow in the US's footsteps and don't rock the boat on the Taiwan question, which is too provocative and dangerous. Such rational voices need to be heard. Well, just this morning, in the meeting with President Biden, President Xi explained China's position on this issue very clearly. The complete reunification of our country is the common desire of all Chinese people. We have the patience and are willing to strive for the prospect of a peaceful reunification with the utmost sincerity and efforts. But if anyone makes any moves towards independence and continues to cross the red lines, China is also prepared to take decisive measures.
That's clear enough, Ambassador. I think President Xi said that China will be patient, but will react if provoked. So you're basically telling us the same message. Thank you for that. I'm seeing quite a lot of questions coming in, but I have a couple of questions I do want to put to you before turning to the participants. Now, when we talk about EU-China, and we talk, as you said, about competition and rivalry, but we also talk about partnership. And one of the questions that keeps coming up is climate change. We also talk about biodiversity and, of course, access to COVID and vaccines. But here too, Ambassador, I think you'll agree, it isn't really plain sailing. Neither the US nor the EU were very happy that President Xi did not turn up for COP26, but also not for G20. And at Glasgow, China joined India in also opposing a phasing out of fossil fuels, talked rather about a phasing down of coal. So is there really cooperation taking place, or are we just once again just talking about rhetoric and not really talking about real cooperation between EU and China?
Well, President Xi addressed both events via video link, giving full accounts of China's claim for economic development and climate course. State Councilor and Foreign Minister Mr. Wang Yi attended the G20 summit, and China's climate envoy, Mr. Xie Zhenhua, also led a big delegation to COP26. China's participation contributed to the success of such events. Accusations on China's absence do not stand. You mentioned the differences between China and the EU. The difference is not scary in itself. Even inside the EU, there are differences from time to time. The key is how we perceive and handle the differences. The EU has a motto of united in diversity. China also has similar idioms like harmony in diversity and seeking common ground while reserving differences. In face of differences, we need further dialogue rather than shutting the door of communication. China and the EU have extensive common ground in trade, economy, green and digital transition, vaccine access, and many other international and regional affairs. We only differ sometimes in specific approaches. China and the US also have differences, even major ones. Still, we are able to work together for the signing of the Paris Agreement some years ago and the Glasgow Declaration last week. I believe it will further strengthen our climate cooperation at the bilateral and multilateral levels. The history of China-EU relations shows that the two sides have far more common interests than differences. Our cooperation represents the common expectation of the international community, and it is also in our best interest. Take the climate change issue as an example. As early as the 1990s, the two sides built joint projects on energy saving and emission reduction. In building our carbon market, we also draw the EU's experience and have its support. In October this year, China and the EU held the second high-level environment and climate dialogue and reached consensus on a series of issues. Our common taxonomy for sustainable finance is just another example of China-EU cooperation in this area. I noticed some accusations that India and China last-minute disagreement undercut the overall ambition of COP26. Well, if we take a look at the Paris Agreement, it's clear that its success lies in utmost inclusiveness. Similarly, for COP26 to deliver, it also needs to take into consideration the concerns of both developing and developed countries and find a common ground between them. This is, of course, no easy feat. Developed countries fail to commit to their climate finance goals to help vulnerable economies. At COP26, developing countries appeal to set up an emission compensation fund was also denied by the rich countries. But this should not lead to underestimate of the conference's significance. Time is calling for more concrete actions. We have no time to waste on accusations. Moving on to the pandemic, the two sides cooperated effectively in the past almost 2 years. But our cooperation could have been broader and better, especially on promoting vaccine availability in developing countries. Unfortunately, the obsession with the geopolitics, rivalry, and the narrative battle undermined our cooperation and shackled one's own hands. No one is safe till everyone is safe. In face of common challenges, China and the EU as responsible major powers must transcend our ideological differences and work together in good faith. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So, of course, words matter. And of course, all these agreements and declarations are important, but actions matter as well. And very many vulnerable countries on climate change are very disappointed. And as you know, tears were shed as well. So the devil is in the detail. And I think that needs to be discussed by yourself, the Chinese, the Americans, and the Europeans when it comes to dealing with this big issue of climate change. Now, I have many questions, but there's some very important questions coming in also from our participants. And I would like to share some of them with you, Ambassador. And then if we have time, I'll come back to some of my own queries for you. So there is an important question put in by Finbar Birmingham. He's the correspondent for the South China Morning Post. And he says the EU is in the process of reviewing the sanctions on China. A decision will be made in December. So if the EU decides to roll over the sanctions, would China retaliate? Question from Finbar. I was wondering if you would like to answer that. And then also a question from Ivaldas Labanuskas. It is about Lithuania. And he says, I would like to ask in the context of EU-China relations, what are the main reasons for Lithuania-China, this diplomatic row? And how can we avoid such situations in the future? Do you have any suggestions how to solve this row? So I wonder if you would like to take these two questions now, Ambassador.
Well, for the CAI, as I expressed just now, our position remains unchanged. It's a very good document. And the business communities of both two sides will benefit a lot from it. And we are very open and ready to work together with the EU side to overcome obstacles and to complete the ratification as early as possible, inshallah. And for the relations between China and Lithuania, of course, China has set up the diplomatic ties with Lithuania almost 30 years ago. And on a very solid foundation, the political foundation, in which Lithuania recognized and accepted the one China principle. And any attempt to cross the red line relating to the one China principle, which is our core interest, is not allowed. It will be considered the interference in our internal affairs. So we hope that Lithuania authorities will realize that and correct its mistake and come back to the position of one China principle. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. So there's also a question actually about the same question about Taiwan. It's from Kan Lu. He says, Ambassador, what do you think about the recent diplomatic contacts between the EU and members of parliament with Taiwan? I mean, in democracies, European parliamentarians have the right to meet whoever they want to. So I was wondering if there's a question there for you on that.
Well, just now I record the position declared by Mr. Christopher Sommers, then Vice President of EEC, over the question of Taiwan. From the very beginning, when the two sides set up the diplomatic ties, the EU has promised clearly they are adhering to one China policy and not to have any official relations with Taiwan. It's very clear. I hope that European Union institutions will stick to such position. It's a reason.
Ambassador, I'm going to read out some more questions for you on a very similar issue. And obviously, Let's see what you can say more than what you've said already. So one question from Valentin Stanchu is, would China accept Taiwan to have official international relations as an autonomous region of China based on the Kosovo model as enshrined in agreements with Serbia? Then there's a question also from Kan Le. He says, Taiwanese see what's happening in Hong Kong. It used to be one country, two systems, but now nearly one country, one system. So I know you have talked about Taiwan, but let's take your responses to these two questions as well, and then we'll move on to other topics.
Taiwan is the part of China. The question of Taiwan is the internal affairs of China. And in fact, during the past decades, the central government has taken serious measures and policies to realize the peaceful reunification under the light of the one country, two systems. The problem is that the current authorities in the island refuse to recognize the one China, the factor. So this is the problem. I think the Chinese people on the both to across the Taiwan Straits has enough wisdom to resolve their own internal affairs by themselves.
Thank you, Ambassador. So let's move on to climate change, if I may. So this is a question by Leon Packenberg, and I wonder if you could provide some details of the China-US agreement on climate that was reached in the margins of COP26. Are there bilateral commitments, and what follow-up will there be? I wonder if you're in a position to do that. The bilateral agreement on climate change between the US and China in the margins of COP26.
Well, I think the joint declaration of between China and the US has been publicized, and we can get it. It's very professional, and I'm sorry, I cannot repeat all the contents.
Of course.
But anyway, it shows the spirit of the cooperation between the two sides over such big issues, which concerns the future of the world.
So, Ambassador, let's come back to some of the questions that I think are also important. We've looked at quite a few questions coming in. The Indo-Pacific is now very much in the headlines, and their focus once again seems to be on, if I may say so, containing China. This is the strategy of AUKUS, this trilateral military alliance between Australia, UK, and the US, and it's also the basis of the Quad, which brings together the US, Japan, Australia, and India. And everyone seems to have something to say about the Indo-Pacific. There is concern about Beijing building up its military budget, nuclear arsenal, and other activities also in the South China Sea. So once again, there is a sentiment of impending confrontation and doom. Just wondering about your views on that as well. Are we headed for a hot conflict in the South China Sea, in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, the Asia-Pacific region, which has grown into the world's most dynamic region in the past few decades, is home to many countries, including China. Drawing from our cultural norms, regional countries have formed the ASEAN-centered cooperation architecture, which prioritizes a consensus-driven, non-confrontational way of addressing problems. Unfortunately, bloc politics and exclusive cliques are putting regional peace and stability under threat these days. The recent establishment of AUKUS is a worrisome move in this direction. AUKUS is a military alliance which concerns nuclear technology. It has the potential to disrupt the regional or even international order in numerous ways. It could create nuclear proliferation risks, trigger a new round of arms race, undermine regional peace and stability, undercut the building of a nuclear weapon-free zone in Southeast Asia, and lead to the resurgence of the Cold War mentality. Regional countries and the international community are all quite alarmed by it. To maintain peace and stability in the region, as well as around the world, multilateralism is now our only answer. However, a certain country keeps talking about its returning to multilateralism, but at the same time, spares no efforts in pulling small circles. China, as a responsible major country that practices multilateralism with concrete actions, put forth the Global Development Initiative, promoted the establishment of the RCEP, and applied for accession to CPTPP and DEPA. The EU shares their commitment to multilateralism. In its Indo-Pacific strategy issued earlier this year, the EU also advocates for cooperation instead of a confrontation. When participating in regional affairs, we hope the EU can do as the Romans do and follow our practice of peaceful cooperation, because only by truly respecting countries in the region and by upholding the principle of equality, openness, inclusiveness, and cooperation will they be able to contribute to regional stability and prosperity.
Ambassador, there's a question, if I may, about what will happen after the Merkel era comes to an end in EU-China relations and the impact of possibly a change in policy towards China in Germany, where all three parties that are currently negotiating a coalition government are calling for a more aggressive European foreign policy against China. I was wondering if you'd like to take that question.
Well, China and Germany are each other's comprehensive strategic partners. And now bilateral relations have maintained a strong momentum over the years. Germany is China's largest trading partner in the EU, and China has emerged as Germany's largest trading partner in the world for 5 consecutive years, as well as its second largest export market. The facts and figures assures that the major countries can work together to achieve a win-win result. Going forward, China-Germany and China-EU relations should continue to follow this path. The year 2022 marks the 50th anniversary of the diplomatic ties between China and Germany. We hope the new German government can build on a political legacy of Chancellor Merkel and continue the pragmatic China policy, which follows the expectations of our two peoples.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I'm looking at the questions and I have to say there's another question that I think is really worth asking. can you let us know whether EU MEPs or officials who continue to work with Taiwan can expect to face some retaliation or retribution from Beijing? This is also, again, from South China Morning Post.
I beg your pardon, Shada.
Yes, so the question from Finbar is, MEPs or officials who continue to work with Taiwan, can they expect to face some retaliation or retribution from Beijing? Will they be punished by Beijing?
Any attempt to develop official relations with the Taiwan authorities is not acceptable, because it's the violation of the basic norms of the international relationship.
That answers Finbar's question. Let me come back to the EU and connectivity, Ambassador. You talked about multilateralism, and I have to say the ASEM online summit that will take place later this month is going to be talking about multilateralism. It will also be talking about connectivity. And there, of course, you have China's Belt and Road Initiative, and the EU is coming out very soon with the Global Gateway as well. So my question to you is, do you see this as competition between different connectivity initiatives, or is it possible to have some synergies and to work together on a global public good, which is connectivity?
Well, today's world is in bad need for connectivity. Still sees immense infrastructure needs, which call for countries to cooperate to fill the gap. What the world needs is building bridges rather than dismantling them. China welcomes the EU's global gateway strategy if it is truly inclusive and open, and can help developing countries and promote global connectivity. On the contrary, any attempt to turn infrastructure projects into a geopolitical tool would fail the expectation of the international community and harm one's own interests. China and the EU have both consensus and joint actions in this area. For example, Chinese and German firms worked together on a bridge project in Mozambique. I personally visited the project 5 or 6 years ago. And Chinese and Spanish firms also cooperated closely in building hospitals in Ecuador. China hopes to further cooperate with the EU. We believe that our combined efforts can deliver a win-win result. Even if such cooperation cannot be achieved, we can at least each do some practical work instead of obsessing with the competition. What matters most for developing countries are deeds, not words.
Ambassador, there are lots of questions on the BRI. When will it be completed? All these questions. I think it's important that perhaps at a later stage, China can explain a little bit more about the Belt and Road Initiative and how it really operates and what are the norms and standards. We don't have the time for such a discussion now, but would you like to just give some idea about, let's say, the package that there is in the BRI? What is its long-term goal? And one question that keeps coming up, of course, is about the use of fossil fuels, coal in some of these BRI projects in developing countries. So a quick word about that if you have the time, please.
China as a developing country, according to our experiences, we acknowledge that the infrastructure is very significant to the development, which is the foundation. In China, we have a saying, get reaching, make bridging. So this is now a practical experience. So we really know how bad the developing countries need such infrastructures, roads, bridges, harbors, and the powers and something like telecommunications and something like that. So that's why China issued now the Belt and Road Initiative 6 or 7 years ago. In order to help the developing countries or to call all the international community to work together to develop infrastructure, especially in the developing world. So
yeah. So there's a quick follow-up on that, Ambassador, if I may. It's from Haiyong Yan, and he says, could the EU and China coordinate their policies on Africa? And there, I guess, the Belt and Road Initiative and Global Gateway could be a segue.
But even in more than 10 years ago, when I served in Africa, I have got a very close connection with the EU ambassadors and ambassadors of European EU member states there. And we worked a lot. And also in Brussels, I've exchanged with my counterparts in the EU institutions about how to develop the trilateral cooperation to develop infrastructure. In fact, my European colleague has responded positively, but we need more deeds.
Right, and now my final question to you. We are running out of time, but I do want to talk about the economy as well. And of course, European business leaders, as you know, have been and are quite pessimistic about recent economic trends and initiatives in China, and that there is a fear that China is turning inwards and less ready to welcome European investments and European businesses. Now, yesterday in the Financial Times, you talked about how the EU was discriminatory practices in terms of trade and economics as well. But how do you respond to European business fears about China's dual circulation, other recent economic initiatives?
Well, in fact, lately I spoke with many European business representatives who shared with me that most European companies in China were doing very well and had great expectations for their future there. The latest reports issued by numerous Chinese and international organizations all verified my observation. According to EUCCC's position paper, foreign businesses' expectation and investment confidence in the Chinese market remains steady. Meanwhile, some businesses also expressed their worries and concerns, asking if China will close its door to European businesses and investments. My answer is short and clear: never. As for China's efforts to build a new dual circulation development paradigm and its future moves of opening up, I'd love to provide you with two possible angles. On one hand, certain countries have acted against the trend of the times, pushing for unilateralism, protectionism, and decoupling. They use their technological advantages and financial hegemony to choke our progress and contain our development. They want to forcefully close our door of opening up. It's against such backdrop that China tried to build a new development paradigm aiming at boosting its overall resilience. Under this paradigm, domestic and overseas markets may reinforce each other, and the domestic market serves as the mainstay. On the other hand, dual circulation is not equal to closed-door economic operation or self-isolation, but rather aims at a better connection between the domestic and the international markets and a more open, inclusive global cooperation. Despite external headwinds, China has been stepping up efforts to integrate into the global economic system. After revising its foreign investment negative list for 4 consecutive years, China shortened the list from 93 items in 2017 to 30 items in 2020. 2 weeks ago, my president announced China would further shorten the list and orderly open up its service sectors. Going forward, China's expanding middle income class and its higher quality development will undoubtedly unleash huge growth dividends for both the Chinese and the international markets. And I want to further add that after more than 40 years of reform and opening up, China's economy has undergone radical changes. Competition in today's Chinese market is not how it used to be. With its 150 million market players and higher management and technological standards, the Chinese market will surely become more a competitive place. But I believe that the European companies have not only the will, but also the ability to participate in such competition. I believe they can adapt to developments in the Chinese market and improve their competitiveness through innovation. Eventually, those who take root and work hard in the Chinese market will achieve greater gains. Thank you.
So advice for European business leaders worrying about China. Ambassador, we're coming to the end of this 60-minute briefing, but I do have one final question for you. Now, I know that Chinese New Year will start later in 2022 than our New Year, but what is your one hope as we look forward to 2022? What is your one hope for this rather complicated but important relationship between the European Union and China?
Well, time is flying. We are going to have now a new traditional Chinese New Year. And in the new year, I hope first and foremost, the pandemic is over. Now life will come back to its normal condition. And the world will live in peace, in stability, in cooperation. We'll never see the Cold War mentality. I hate it, you know. All the best to all the people in the world.
As you have said often from your experience in the Arab countries, inshallah. So I join you in saying inshallah. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us for this very, very extensive, comprehensive review of EU-China relations, but also looking at the broader geopolitical landscape in the world, but also in the Indo-Pacific. Thank you very much also to all participants who have joined us. And as you can see, Ambassador, EU-China relations are extremely important in the headlines, but also everybody wants to have a question, everybody wants to know more about it. So I think it is inevitable that we shall meet again, inshallah, next year. And hopefully by then we will be out of the pandemic and perhaps we can do this in person. Thank you once again, Ambassador, for joining us. Thank you very much to the participants for joining us as well. Everyone take care and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Shada. It's my pleasure.